My name is Umesh Srikanta, and I thank the STPGIMS team for giving me this opportunity to talk on this interesting topic. I'm going to be talking on OLIF and the preoperative investigations and the radiological planning that goes along with it. Uh, yeah. So as we know, there are several indications in the present day for an OLIF, and it's ever expanding, and the indications are actually increasing day to day. Grade 1 listhesis, whether it's degenerative or lytic listhesis, are ideal indications for OLIF. Lumbar canal stenosis with no severe central stenosis. Degenerative scoliosis, actually, it has changed the entire management scenario as far as degenerative scoliosis is considered. Discogenic pain that is necessitating surgery, where handling of the neural structures will be kept to as minimum as possible. Pseudoarthrosis after failed posterior fusion. Post-infective instability with no active disease or an epidural compression. These are some of the indications for OLIF surgery. But if we consider in more detail, even within these indications also, there are some cases which are suitable for OLIF, and there are some cases which are not. So coming to the factors that need to be considered as far as selecting the cases for OLIF is considered, we need to see whether these cases are suitable for the approach per se, that is whether they are, the approach is feasible in these particular cases. And there are several factors that are, considered under this category, which we will discuss in detail. The second thing is whether the OLIF or the indirect decompression is going to be efficacious or is going to treat the pathology in an adequate manner as intended, or whether we are going to reduce the pathology or reduce the deformity in an effective way using this particular indirect decompression technique. The third possibility is whether, when dealing with complex pathologies, whether OLIF is a significantly good approach, and whether it can mitigate the risks that are involved in treating these complex pathologies. So these are the factors that we need to consider. We'll go discuss them one by one. Suitability of approach, of course, iliac crest was one of the main factors that we used to consider while dealing with trans-psoas approaches. For OLIF, it's not such a big deal because we approach from anterior and then through the orthogonal maneuver, you can place the cage at in a horizontal position into the long axis of the disc, and that decreases the effect or the obstruction that the iliac crest can cause even while treating at L4-5 pathology in these particular cases. What has become more important, of course, which was not so much in a lateral trans-psoas approach, is the vascular anatomy. As we know, the OLIF corridor exists between the anterior border of the psoas muscle and the lateral border of either the aorta or the iliac vessels, either the iliac vein or most likely the iliac vein or the iliac artery in some cases. So this is a very small window, and we know that this window, if it is more than 1 centimeter, and that is considered safe. And if you look at these images, all of these images are at L4-5, though the window may be adequate in some cases, and we may be very good in some cases, but in some cases, even at the same level, the window may actually be absent. And this is something that we need to actually consider in a very detailed manner while selecting a case for a oblique interbody approach. Of course, there are some cases where we feel that the vessel is very close to the anterior border and there is not enough space between the anterior border of the psoas and the vessels. But we know, and it has been shown in several studies as well, that in the lateral decubitus position, when we stretch the psoas muscle, the vessels tend to move away from the anterior border. The psoas becomes more taut, and hence the window that is there between these two structures actually increases, and that is favorable. So if you find a case where actually the window is very, very narrow, even these cases, not initially, but of course over a period of time, these cases can be considered for approach for an OLIF approach or an anterior to psoas approach in certain cases, because we expect this window to increase when we put the patient in a lateral decubitus position. We need to consider the vascular anomalies, which sometimes may be detected in a routine preoperative investigation like an MRI. Routine preoperative CT is not recommended in all the cases unless it is certain but indicated in certain particular instances. But of course, whether to specifically look for these abnormalities, which actually is present in a very significant number of patients, that is nearly around 40% of patients, according to one study, have shown to have some amount of a vascular abnormality around the vertebral area, as far as which may impact the OLIF approach, but whether to actually do specific investigations to look for these anomalies or not, we'll consider it a little bit in detail a little later. Of course, the other factors that are ureter and the retroperitoneal fat, we need not go into too much of a detail. We know that the ureter is situated close to the anterior border of the psoas in the retroperitoneum, especially at L3, 4, L4, 5. And as we can see in this video, in many cases, we can visualize the ureter either through a thin facial layer, or there will be a thick facial layer along with some fat, which can be easily separated if we are maintaining the facial planes. And then we can go across the ureter in order to reach the anterior border of the psoas. And it has been shown that in 16% of the cases, in all cases, almost all cases, the ureter comes in way of the surgical corridor. But in 16% of the cases, it is very, very close to the area, to our approach, and there is a potential risk of injury. We have also to note the retroperitoneal fat, because in thin individuals, sometimes we are approaching very much anteriorly and the retroperitoneal fat may disappear, or it may be very, very thin layer in those particular cases. So we need to approach and we need to enter the right retroperitoneal space in order to go into the OLIF corridor. So this is something that we need to take precautions and we can find out. The second category, which is very important category, is the efficacy of indirect decompression, whether we are actually selecting OLIF in the right case as far as the pathology is considered. And so, as you know, OLIF acts by the principle of interbody distraction and ligamentotaxis. And if we are not able to distract the interbody, or if the ligaments are not lax or flexible enough to achieve this kind of a ligamentotaxis, then the whole idea of this indirect decompression and hence resolving the underlying pathology is not serving its purpose. So we need to consider factors which are either going to limit or going to restrict the amount of interbody distraction that we can achieve as far as an OLIF is considered. And there are several of these factors. We need to consider facet arthrosis or capsular calcification, which is one of the most common factors that is neglected, because in the presence of such a severe facetal hypertrophy or a calcification, doing an anterior interbody distraction is just going to result in a reverse compressive forces, though it may increase the lordosis in the initial phase, but the amount of compressive forces that are acting may result in cage subsidence in a later period. And of course, presence of calcifications like this, overhanging facets, or like this, or the capsular calcification may prevent any kind of a distraction or any kind of a reduction that we are planning to achieve. These things should be taken into consideration. Of course, the other factors that are chronicity of the case, whether it's a collapsed disc space, whether it's the presence of an anterior or a lateral bridging osteophyte, these things may obviously prevent any kind of a distraction or a reduction maneuver, whether irrespective of the approach. And these also should be considered in due manner as far as planning and pre-OLIF case is considered. One of the ways that has been shown in some cases to consider how much flexible the spine is or how much anterior distraction we can achieve is through by getting what we call as a full extension lateral view X-ray. So as you can see, this is an example where despite a full extension lateral view, the lordosis is increasing by only around 5%, and this is the maximum amount of lordosis that we can probably achieve by anterior distraction. The further distraction may be limited by chronic ALL shortening or due to several other factors that we can find out. Whereas in some cases, despite there being multi-level listhesis and multi-level anterior shortening, but through a full extension lateral view, as you can see here, it is the same patient. The entire vertebral body are coming back into its place. Good reduction can be achieved, and hence these are the ideal cases where OLIF can be done as is being shown in this particular example. Of course, the second category of patients where we need to consider is where indirect decompression may not help at all. In these cases, these are the cases where there is a medial lip of supraarticular process hypertrophy, where there is a front back canal stenosis, as we can see there. When there is a medial lip of facetal hypertrophy that is compressing the traversing nerve root, in these cases, any amount of distraction is not going to cause any effective release of the traversing nerve root in these cases, and these cases are not ideal for an OLIF procedure or for an indirect decompression per se. foraminal stenosis, front back foraminal stenosis. These kind of stenosis are very ideal in the sense there is the abdomen stenosis where by just distracting the disc space, we are moving the compressive element away from the nerve root, we are lifting the nerve root. These kind of cases are very ideal. But those that are due to a combination of either a superior facetal hypertrophy and an osteophyte, or a posterior disc osteophyte together compressing the nerve root, these cases are not very ideal for an indirect decompression. Of course, severe central canal stenosis pathology cannot be addressed by an indirect decompression, and these are not very ideal cases. So again, the third complex, that is the pathology of complex pathologies where there is a high grade listhesis, or there is a severe scoliosis where their coronal cab is more than 40, or lateral listhesis of more than 10, and a rotational abnormality. These may hinder, especially in the initial stages. It is a definite no, but as experience progresses, of course, these cases can easily be tackled, actually are better tackled with an lateral approach rather than a posterior approach in these cases. Of course, so what are the investigations that are needed in order for us to plan adequately for an OLIF approach? There are standard investigations. We do, of course, a lateral flexion extension as well as an AP standing radiographs, as well as a full length, that is a whole spine AP and a lateral images in order to calculate the spinal, sagittal as well as coronal parameters, and to plan how much of reduction or how much of restoration of lordosis is required. An MRI usually should involve an entire abdominal girth sequence in order to adequately plan the level, adequately plan at that particular level what are the abdominal structures that are there, and what is the amount of retroperitoneal fat that is there, which will give us idea about any unusual anomalies that are there in certain cases. I was mentioning whether we should do specifically any investigations to find out any other abnormalities like CT abdomen or a CT angiography or a dual contrast CT abdomen. So as studies have shown, these are, though they may detect abnormalities in a larger percentage of patients, that is nearly around 40%, 32 plus 7, but these findings are not going to change the plan of surgery for any particular patient. And especially the radiation induced damage is there, these things should be avoided as much as possible, especially considering in the present day era where we are doing an intraoperative OM or intraoperative 3D imaging technique, where it may further add to the radiation exposure that is sustained by the patient. MR neurography is a very fancy investigation. It is not required as far as OLIF is concerned, which was more important for a lateral transverse approaches, and I'm not going to detail about that. So just to summarize, for a successful OLIF surgery, adequate yet judicious investigations, appropriate case selection, meticulous planning, as well as perfect execution. So these are the cornerstones of how we need to plan, how we need to think, and how we can do a successful OLIF surgery. Thank you.